So we're moving on to the next session, the state of skills, and this comes in two parts. In the first part, we're going to hear from Liz Jakubowski, and I'll introduce her to you in a moment, and Siobhan Walsh. And then we're going to invite in a panel, and we'll have a facilitated discussion with Harry taking the lead in person in Adelaide. So Liz and I have known each other now for almost 10 years, and I can't believe it's been that long. She's a leader who's experienced in building digital and data platforms, communications, and she's also fantastic at managing stakeholders. Liz has held senior executive and leadership roles across research and public agencies, including the CSIRO, NICTA, the ABC, New South Wales Health, and she's consulted to the private sector. In CSIRO Data 61, Liz founded a student job matching platform called Ribbit.net, and it matches tertiary students with STEM and digital skills to casual roles and internships with fast-growing businesses. Ribbit established a community of 40,000 students across universities in Australia and 5,000 of the nation's leading startups and employers. And it was acquired by Stone & Chalk in 2020, which is now run by Michael Bromley, and we'll meet him later. Liz is now the director of the digital team for the National Skills Commission, and I invite her to share her insights from the important work she's been doing lately. Hello, Liz.
Hello, Maria, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks for enabling me to be part of this event today. I'd like to start off a little bit by talking about my role and what the National Skills Commission does. So I might ask Gavin if you can just flip through to the next slide, please. Okay, so a bit about the Commission. The purpose of the Commission is to provide leadership on skills at national level. The Commission was established almost 2 years ago in response to the Joyce Review on skills and vocational education and training. The actual role of the National Skills Commissioner is an independent position, and the makeup of the Commission, we're about 120 people at the moment, and we're economists, data analysts, data scientists, and people like myself that bring things together. Our vision is really about strengthening Australia's future workforce and providing the sort of national leadership that's needed right now around current, emerging, and future workforce skill needs. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'd like to talk a bit about the sort of things we've been doing over the last couple of years. We've actually churned out a whole bunch of reports. We've been analysing data. We've been making tools to help explain the data and share it with the public. We've been doing this by building digital web applications and dashboard tools. That's part of my job, and it's a really fun job. I get to work with all of these amazing people and build these great digital products. And what I'd like you to do after this presentation is to actually go on our website and have a look at some of the work that we're doing. As you can see, we've produced different reports on different areas of focus, post-COVID workforce. We've done skills priority lists. We've looked at VET qualifications and analysed different qualifications, how they relate to each other. And we've done some really, really cool things, which I want to focus on. And also, just before we move to the next slide, at the end of this month, we're releasing a bunch of new updates and other cool things. So please come and have a look at the website and tell us what you think. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to focus on three things today. The State of the Skills Report, which is the first report that actually provides a snapshot of the current state of skills in Australia. And it's looking at data through the lens of all the big trends. The Australian Skills Classification Tool, which completely redefines jobs by looking at jobs through the perspective of skills clusters rather than occupations and roles. And the Nowcasting dashboard, which uses real-time and additional data and machine learning techniques to show what's happening in real time at regional levels, at really micro areas like local government areas, so you can dive into the data and see what's happening in particular markets. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with State of Skills Report, which was released last December. Here we're looking at what the jobs of the future will be and what are the core skills that might underpin those jobs. And we were analysing the big picture forces and trends and how they're going to shape Australia's future, draw out what that means for skills and jobs. So the key trends that we're seeing are a shift to high-skilled jobs and service industries, the resilience of non-routine sort of cognitive jobs in the face of AI and automation, and the importance of soft skills, and of course the opportunities created by technology. Our employment projections show that over the next 5 years, the strongest growth in jobs will be in four service sectors, which are healthcare and social assistance, professional science and technical services, accommodation and food, and education and training. And they'll actually account for around 64% of new jobs to be created over the next half decade. So while we don't know every twist and turn, we know that the future is going to be reliant on what we call the 4 Cs: care, cognitive, communication, and computing skills. That's a summary of the skills that we've categorised in terms of being in strong demand. And of course, you look at that in the context of demographic change. We know that the population is ageing, the demand for workforces in the health sector is likely to increase significantly. Yet there's fewer people of working age to support ageing of the population. And I was only looking at the data over the weekend, and I saw that for every state except Northern Territory and ACT, the highest population demographic category is still for those 65 and over. So that's a huge thing that we have to address as a country. Skills, computing skills and communication skills, of course, are part of nearly every job these days. And we know that very high-level oral and written communication skills are less likely to be automated, so they're going to continue to be in demand as a core skill of the future. Next slide, please. So while a lot of people are worrying about automation and technology taking our jobs, the reverse is also true. There's so many jobs being created in technology, and we know that, we hear that echoing all around us all the time. You've had organisations like the Tech Council being created and advocating strongly, and so many other bodies. And over the next 5 years, we expect the number of digital jobs to jump by around 46,000 in Australia, or 30%. And when we're looking at these digitally related skills, we see that they're the fast growing and the fastest growing in terms of emerging across a range of occupations. So not just sort of your traditional IT or computer geeky work. It's really now just part and parcel of things like, you know, modern construction, architecture, advanced manufacturing, agri-tech, you name it. So the other thing that we find is that of real interest is that around half of the new jobs to be created over the next 5 years will require a bachelor's degree or higher qualification. And at least 9 out of 10 new jobs will require some form of post-secondary education. So that really makes education and training a super important part of the supply of skills that we'll need in coming years. Okay, next slide, please. A little bit about transformation of the labour market. What's really interesting we're finding at the moment is that, as mentioned before, things like teaching and education and recreation, sporting events, these other categories, arts, entertainment, environmental management and HR, are all the areas where there's less likely to be automation because they do require cognitive skills, good communication skills, and also, not surprisingly, areas that can be automated, whether it's, you know, the whole transport, supply, logistics chain, agriculture, production processes, machinery and so on, are areas that are going to be automated. So it's just a little snapshot of what we're picking up. Next slide, please. I thought I would focus on demand for emerging skills because that's probably of most interest here. So the analysis that we've done gives us close to real-time insights into how Australian jobs are evolving and changing. And we actually took this snapshot of the last 5 years pre-COVID, and we wanted to sort of see, you know, what's happening over that period of time. And already from 7 years ago now, there's been a pickup, not as strong a pickup as other countries, and I'll get into that in a moment, but a pickup in terms of these new skills that weren't even in the Australia and New Zealand classification of organisations lexicon, which is done by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, till only last year. So these jobs are just changing so quickly. So things relating to software, AI, data analysis, data engineering, cybersecurity, data science, machine learning are all very much on the upswing. This chart just gives you a bit of a snapshot in terms of what's been happening over the last 7 years. And what you can see, y-axis list of fastest growing emerging skills in the economy in terms of percentages of job listings which were requesting them, and the x-axis is the cumulative growth of the share of each skill year by year. Next slide, please. I thought it'd be good just to give you an international comparison with a close neighbour, Singapore, just to show you how things have changed so rapidly over the last 2 years. So this is from 2013 to 2020, and we're tracking cutting edge digital skills. As you can see, I mean, all you need to know from this graph really is you've got a very steep growth in Singapore for the skills, which range across Internet of Things, AI, automation. You can read that category hopefully down below, machine learning, data viz and so on, and cybersecurity. In Australia, we were sort of bumbling along a little bit, and then COVID changed all of that. What we've then found is over the last 2 years, the growth has really grown very, very quickly for those different skill sets. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a moment as well. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk about the Australian Skills Classification Tool. So this is really, really cool. It totally changes how we define jobs by looking at skills rather than occupations, job titles, qualifications. And that tool is actually on the NSC website. You can play with it later on. What you need to know is there's currently 600 skills profiles. We set it up in March last year. We updated in September. We're about to do a whole new update. We're just going to bring on another 500 occupations. And what's really cool about it is you can play with what are the core competencies. You can look at the technology tools that each occupation uses, like software, hardware, and the specialist tasks for each of those different occupations. And why that is cool is because, as we know, the industry and the economy is just changing so quickly. And as new jobs evolve, or as old jobs evolve and new jobs come on board, you want to be able to understand what are the sort of common skill sets and underpin these things so that the workforce itself is informed, as well as employers and policymakers, around what's going on. And to be able to map these sorts of things in the context of one tool that brings all these together is really, really amazing. It's work that's being done by my colleagues at the NSC. We're very proud of it. It's still currently in beta, so we've been trialling it and getting feedback, and we're about to update it shortly. Next slide, please. I just wanted to jump in quickly to show you a little bit about how these things work. So you can jump into the tool and look at, say, for example, an analyst programmer. You can see the sort of specialist tasks that are used. On the right-hand side are the 10 core competencies and the rankings, and you've got skills cluster families. You can see how that breaks down into those different sorts of categories. And this really helps you get a deeper understanding of what skill sets there are. So if your own business is evolving, as all Australian businesses are evolving, you can then also think about who you've got on staff and how you can use those skills to map across to other things. Next slide, please. This is a slide which is just really interesting. The bubbles basically represent from the y-axis on the left to the x-axis. If you look at it in terms of going across from left to right, what you can see growing are the various different cluster families in terms of skills. So you can see that there's a whole area of expertise around computer or software performance, also ICT design, developing websites, developing software, and so on. It's, again, just a really interesting snapshot of what's going on based on the data that we've got, and the growth is really, really strong for all of these skill clusters. Next slide, please. This one's looking at it from a broader lens. So again, it's using data that we prepared for the State of the Skills report and looking at what's happening in the context of skills more generally outside of that digital stream. So again, if you look on the right-hand side, moving towards the upper corner, you can see that health and care is really an area of a lot of growth there. And you can also see things like teaching and education, computers and electronics sort of moving up there. So again, it's just a reflection of what I was talking about before. These are all things that you can play with later on when you go to our website. Next slide, please. Once you go into the actual tool, you'll also be able to look at different job descriptions. So you've got a graphic designer and an illustrator, which are two separate occupations at the moment, but you can see just from looking at this slide how complementary the skill sets are. And as you delve into these different occupational groups more and more, you will see that, for example, an accountant has a lot of skills that a data analyst would use, for example, and there's many, many comparisons like that. And it's just really interesting, I feel, to go in there and have a look at these sorts of things. So again, this has all been built using ML, natural language processing, looking at how the different categories of jobs are skilled in terms of phrasing and meaning of skills and so on. And it's an opportunity to play with that later on. Next slide, please. This is, again, looking at something from the perspective of gateway skills. Again, I was talking about how you can apply different skill sets in different areas of occupation. So data analysis is an example of a gateway skill, and it's amongst the strongly trending and emerging skills, plays a unique role in enabling job transitions in other more specialised areas. And again, you can see that there's a lot of need for these sorts of skills across a whole range of industry areas. So I'm really just picking an example that's very common to us, but you can pick any number of other examples. And the whole purpose of this is for us to better understand what sort of gateway skills will help enable job transition pathways and how we can, as policymakers, best help support and enable them. Next slide, please. How am I going for time? Okay, I'll keep going. I've got a few more slides to show. So one is nowcasting of employment by region and occupation. So this is a very, very cool tool. It's a new experimental data set. We just launched it last year, and it is using experimental data developed by my colleagues at the NSC. So we're using nowcasting, which is an emerging technique in the field of economics, used mainly to derive data on economy-wide indicators such as GDP and unemployment. And we've applied this to labour markets at a detailed level, and we produce a monthly series of employment by region and occupation in Australia using this data. So again, it's there to play with on the website. We're constantly updating, evolving all these tools as we get more data, more feedback. And what's interesting about this one is it's the first of its kind that's actually playing with this experimental data, using it in real time. Up until now, it was only readily available as part of the ABS Census data series and other ABS products. So here we're looking at these real-time insights that are being produced monthly, 355 occupations across 88 regions in Australia. And yeah, you can go into your own and have a look at it. I'm just going to pull out two examples. Next slide, please. So one example is where I am at the moment. I'm here in Sydney in the CBD, and you can see that here if you're looking at software programmers, you can see what the growth changes over the course of the last year, the 1 year, and over the course of the last 5 years, and how that compares to the national average. So you can see it's really grown very, very quickly here in Sydney. You can look at that. You can look at other regions and how it compares elsewhere. So let's pick another region. Next slide, please. And here I'm looking at Adelaide. So looking at aged and disabled carers and how quickly it's grown in this case in North Adelaide. So over 1 year, the growth's been 22%. Over 5 years, it's been 63%. And that again just reinforces what I was talking about before, which is there's huge growth happening at the moment around aged care, around digital tools, and all of these things are being brought together by the various things that we're putting together on the NSC website. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd finish off by just doing a quick shout out to my colleagues at the Australian Public Service Commission. They've actually created a digital stream, professional stream, and it's all about professionalising digital skills in the public sector. they're doing some really amazing things, industry partnerships, digital entry-level programs. So anyone who wants to skill up in the public sector now can, and get all those sorts of skills we were talking about before. And there's specific things for women and for people who are looking at, mobility and other aspects. I just wanted to focus on one thing at the end, final slide, semi-final slide. One of the things they've done, which is a world first, is they've actually established this accreditation pilot with the global organisation that deals with skills and competency frameworks. And they did this last year. They trained up their own people as assessors, and they've got all them on board, and some of them have been accredited now, and they've got badges. Again, this is a world first, and it just shows the leadership of the APSC, who are really keen to upskill the public service overall. And it's a really exciting thing. It's obviously something that will attract a lot of, I think, really good people into the public sector, which is where we also need really good people, as well as in the tech sector and all other great industries across Australia. That's pretty much it for me. Final slide has got my details. If you'd like any more information about the NSC, or to contact me, you can contact me, Liz Jakubowski at National Skills Commission, or go to our website. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed presenting today.
Thank you so much, Liz. Yet again, you're in the right place at the right time, doing the right work. There's having access to that information. The narrow casting is important, and I can only imagine Siobhan thinking, I've got that piece of data, but I don't have that, so I'll give Liz a call. So there'll be a lot of ingesting of data happening. Let me introduce you to Siobhan. Siobhan's an award-winning workforce strategist who's obsessed with developing inclusive workforce intelligence and designing meaningful careers at scale. For almost 2 decades, Siobhan's worked across the UK, Ireland, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, China, Australia, and New Zealand, delivering the workforce behind some of Australia's largest projects, including the Melbourne Metro, Roy Hill, W2B, and the Sydney Metro. Siobhan is the CEO and co-founder of ReGeek. Welcome, Siobhan.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure.
So before I sort of start dipping into a few little pictures and some slides, I thought I would give everyone a little bit of context into how I view the world and what we really stand for at ReGeek. So as Maria mentioned, my background was, I was a workforce strategist. My career was responsible for finding, moving, mobilizing, reskilling, multi-skilling talent. And it was really difficult. Really difficult. So on one side of my business, I would have been letting thousands of people go when we demobilized a project. But on the east coast of Australia, we would have been hiring thousands of people that we just couldn't get. And for me, there was this massive disconnect, where these folks were being highly impacted by us not being able to create opportunities for them. Yet we were paying millions of dollars on the other side of the business to find these folks. We were, it was just crazy. And ReGeek was born from a place of just pure frustration, if I'm honest. I couldn't believe that we can do all of these incredible things, but I cannot tell you who any of my people were in my business. We had no idea about what skills someone had. So we had a job title that was in our system, and that was pretty much all we had. And I was really focused on, well, how can I create, just like you talk about your net zero strategy and energy, how come it is okay for organizations of the size that I was working at to waste people potential without even thinking about doing it? You've seen, the big banks, you've seen governments, retailers, all of these different industries that would go through these massive fluxes of hiring aggressively and actually letting folks go. And, from my perspective, myself, Mike, my other co-founder, and Shuja Zhang, we really committed to creating a world with zero wasted potential. Now, a world with zero wasted potential for us is a world where every single person, no matter what your background, no matter what your education, no matter what your gender, your personal characteristics, that everyone has a right to a meaningful career. where every business is not wasting their potential because they're doing the things that we were doing, right? Letting thousands of people go, hiring thousands, letting them go, hiring thousands. This is the thing that happens all over the world, right? A zero wasted potential business is a business that has the right people at the right time with the right skills, so they are fully optimized. And more importantly, zero wasted potential in society is this concept for, well, it's not a concept, it's a mission for us, which is all about how do we build technology to make sure that we give everyone access to an opportunity. We created the world's first independently audited ethical AI. We partnered up with University of Technology of Sydney and the good folks at the World Economic Forum. And the reason that we did this before we shipped our product to market was we wanted to make sure that the technology that we were building, given the amount of data that we had, was not going to cause any harm in any of the talent decisions that we made. Now, how ReGeek actually works. So we're a workforce intelligence platform. So think of us like when we come into a large organization like New South Wales government, John Holland, Woolworths, these are the types of customers we work with, right? All of these organizations have this incredible central nervous system. So what ReGeek actually does is it gives you full visibility of all of the people that exist inside their organization. So not just the job title. We look at every single person from the second that they have entered into the workforce or left school. We think of them as having a backpack, and we collect what are all the skills that Jane has collected her whole career. And what are all the skills that she's actually gained while with our organization? But more importantly, we then look at, well, what could Jane do next? So ReGeek has mapped over 400 million real people's career paths. And what we want to do is look at, well, when we do see a postee, a banking clerk, a chef transitioning into new opportunities, a veteran, what were they? How did it happen? What skills did they gain? How long did it take? And what this information does is it allows organizations to actually look at an individual based on their skills and not their job title. I mean, I'm a CEO of a technology, one of the fastest growing startups in the country, and I come from HR. I've never actually ran a technology company before, but if you look at my backpack, I got all of these skills I collected my whole career, and now I'm putting them to use. So what we're really saying to organizations is, there is a way to unlock your organization and find the hidden talent within, but we got to shift up how we look at people. We got to look at skill adjacencies and skill recommendations and bridging skills and where we can shift folks from one part of the business to another, because that doesn't just have a greater impact for the business and them not losing money, but also the impact that it has to the individual, to their family, to society. It's incredible. So we're really calling on all organizations to put a zero waste to potential people strategy in place. And the top organizations globally are starting to do this. So this is why we're growing so quick, because there's this direct link between business performance and ESG, and zero waste to potential is that new wave. It will no longer be acceptable for large organizations to let people go while hiring people on the other side. They have got a social responsibility to make sure that they take those folks and pivot them into something else. So that's really what we stand for at ReGeek. When we're looking at organizations, so one of the biggest problems that you'll see in companies is they've got sort of quite archaic job architecture systems. So like Liz was saying, the old school way of doing things is you look at, a job group, a job family, rules within that, and then a couple of skills against that. And what we believe in is every organization needs to have a dynamic job architecture. Clusters of skills and tasks make up your jobs. So whether those jobs are permanent jobs, gigs, projects, secondments, higher duties, each one of them is made up of this little cluster of skills and tasks and how much they're required for. And from a ReGeek perspective, what we're really helping large organizations do is really focus on, well, let's look at what are all the jobs that you say you actually require and what are the skills that you actually need for those jobs. We look at all of the folks that already work for them. And it's really interesting because a lot of the times customers will say to us, we need these jobs that have all of these skills, but actually their most highest performers only have 50% of those skills. So what we're doing is having that little moment to sort of have a mini intervention to kind of use data to say, well, you thought you needed this 5 years ago, but actually the world has evolved a lot. And actually what we're now seeing is these product owners technically have these skills. And we can actually see multiple different pathways. Let's say to get to cyber, here are all the examples of how we've seen others. In the 400 million people that we're looking at, here is all the times that we can see that they've transitioned. And the really smart organizations, the ones that are going to win this war for talent, are the organizations that are going to rethink how they look at jobs. And inside ReGeek, what we're doing is we're telling you what are all the skills that your jobs actually require? What are all the skills that you've got access to? So the folks that currently work for you or the folks that are in the marketplace. And more importantly, we then start looking at, well, what are the learnings that you already provide your organization? And when you have that sort of three-leg of the stool information, that's when you can really start solving this problem. From a ReGeek perspective as well, we have seen an absolute rapid growth. This was a concept that we had before COVID, right? At that time, we had bushfires, we had, massive economic shifts, we had, major infrastructure peaks, we had all of these different things. And for me, this is an ongoing problem that we're going to have forever. Because COVID wasn't just an overnight thing for us. We were seeing this well before COVID happened, that organizations need to have agility on how they look after their people. And true agility will make sure that they're transitioning any folks that they have that are no longer going to be required for future roles, whether it's through a change in business requirements or those folks aren't required anymore because let's say you're a bank and you're shutting down lots of your branches. Every single individual has an opportunity to turn that redundancy into a pivot. And creating an actionable, personalized career path where you look at every single individual and that backpack that they've got, and you turn that into here is the options, Jane, that you have within our company that you could do. And here are all the skill gaps that you need to get there. And here's how we as an organization are going to help you get there. And what we're really seeing is organizations shifting because COVID has caused this massive panic where they now know that they have to do this. You're now seeing organizations, leadership teams being told that from shareholders that it's not acceptable for them to keep firing and hiring. So they're now being really strategic around how do we find critical talent in the market? So how do we build new pathways of folks? How do we take, the branch assistant and turn her into a product owner? How do we create more cyber? How do we create more risk roles? And there is all of these hidden talent within the business that we're now seeing customers really focused on unlocking and then finding them those new pathways. Now, from an individual point of view, imagine you're on a path and that moment changes and out of complete no control to you, you have to completely reskill. That moment is a moment that we as a society, as leaders, we're responsible for. And we now have tools like the incredible work that Liz's team is doing from looking at the broader picture, and tools like ReGeek, which are actually helping organizations be able to look after that individual and make sure that they have a meaningful, healthy transition back into a new opportunity. Now, I'm pretty obsessed about the skills side. I could talk about skills for a very long time. I think the other thing to remember when you're looking at how to unlock your organizations is, you can't just buy lots of learning and throw it into a business and hope that everyone learns. Because we can see that under 20% of the population will ever do that, even during COVID, even when they know they don't have an opportunity. So what we need to do is create hyper-personalization. So how do we orient the individual so that individual has been impacted, and how do we take them on a journey to actually turn them into something else, give them the confidence using data to actually change them from being in one role into another. And how ReGeek does that is, for instance, we can see organizations, they know 12 to 18 months in advance when they're about to make some really drastic changes. We know everyone's been talking about the robots are coming for us. It's old news, right? If we know with a good bit of notice, what you should be doing is priming your organization for change. And when we say that, what we're talking about is priming the individuals that are going to be impacted by navigating them through this time, navigating them by sending them their own personalized actionable career paths with the perfect learning at the perfect time, and showcasing to that individual the people like you. Here's how they've done it. Here's how an Australian postie has transitioned into a new opportunity. Here is how someone from the army has turned into cyber. Here's how you get there. Because what that information does is it really helps navigate that individual. And we call that our career co-pilot. From an impact point of view, this costs an absolute truckload of money. The cost of not reskilling in a normal organization in Australia is $175,000. Imagine if you're making any massive changes in your business, you've got notice, a course on Go One or one of those awesome platforms is $5,000, 3 months ramp time. Plus, I got to go and hire all those folks that no one can get because we're all fighting over the same people, right? And we know that, 70% of employees, they do not have mastery of the skills that they require for their job. So we have a whole organization. We've got a massive talent shortage in the market. We've got all of these folks that don't have the right skills for the opportunities we require in the future. But yet we're just buying learning and hoping everyone will learn. So this is why we believe in looking at this picture in a much more sort of holistic approach, understanding what are all the skills that you actually have in your business. What are all the skills and tasks you actually require for your business? And what are the learnings that will bridge the gaps? If we don't have skill adjacencies, how do we create new capability? How do we get folks there? And how do we use ethical technology to make sure that everyone has access to a fair and meaningful career? And we're really passionate about this, right? We're living our life's work doing this, and we've got the privilege to get to work with some of the leading organizations in the world who really do believe that zero waste to potential is the future. And the best leaders in this country will stop making people redundant while hiring thousands. They'll put their people team to work and say, there is a better way to do this, and we need to have zero waste. So what can we do about that? And I'm really excited because we are seeing a shift. There is a massive shift in the leadership in Australia, but also globally. ESG is becoming with the UN very hot in terms of the expectations on leaders, and you can't get away with it anymore. So bit of call to action to everyone to create a zero waste to potential strategy within your business, whether you're government and you're not utilizing the talent that you've got, whether you're private sector and you're letting folks go, or whether you're an organization that is not giving folks access to meaningful careers and they have to leave your business to get an opportunity somewhere else. Think of the zero waste to potential, the holistic way of doing this. And in doing so, you'll have a really incredible impact and a recurring impact, not only to the person and their family. Your business will make way more money, but also you're having a much greater impact in society. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and tell you what we're doing at ReGeek. And, we really believe in the zero waste to potential.
It's us
Thanks,
that
Maria.
should be thanking you. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Siobhan Savage. Now, during this program is quite dense. There's a lot of content, and we do that on purpose. It's to ensure that you hear from the best and the brightest, from the globally successful, and you walk away with answers to the questions that you came in with new questions to ask your organizations, and with actions that you can take. In this second part of the skills session, I'm going to introduce you to 3 leaders who will expand the conversation. Each of them will give us some brief opening remarks, and then Harry will join us to facilitate the Q&A. So let's begin. Gaurav Kheterpal is the Chief Learning Officer at MTX Group. This is a leading global technology consulting firm that's based in India. It's a leading global technology firm. Gaurav is based in India, and he plays a key role directing MTX's global internal training and career development function, and engaging with external stakeholders to advance industry skills development. Gaurav is a BITS Pilani India alumni with 21 years of industry experience and was nominated to Forbes Technology Council as an official member in 2020. He's presented as a speaker at significant industry conferences including Dreamforce, the Salesforce World Tour, London's Calling, and others. And he's recognised by Salesforce as a most valuable person, as a trailblazer, and he serves on the partner advisory board for Service Cloud. Gaurav is passionate about creating stable and rewarding career pathways in tech through training and mentoring for young people and people with diverse experience and backgrounds seeking new career opportunities later in life. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Gaurav. Please welcome him today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And at MTX, we realize that all industries face a competition for talent, and that is true for tech. And there is a constant emphasis on reskilling, and we have been doing some good work in that space. And I'm hoping to share my experiences today with you and the broader audience around that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. Our next panelist is Michael Bromley. He's the Group CEO of Stone and Chalk. He's a digital and innovation change agent, and he helps businesses transform into digitally innovative organizations through the implementation of lean and agile design practices. And he uses business principle design to create nimble and responsive organizations that can respond to the velocity of change. He's demonstrated success and innovation across IT, marketing, product development, and digital transformation, with over 15 years' experience as a member of executive leadership teams in telco, financial services, online services, and consulting. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Bromley. Okay.
I think we just go and keep going with the rest of our guests.
You'd like to keep going, and then we start with the... Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. We have more time for chat.
Excellent, excellent. And our final panelist is James Wyndon. James is an entrepreneur and investor with deep experience creating groundbreaking digital platforms in Australia and the United States. He's a co-founder and co-CEO of Flare. James oversees Australia's leading pay and benefits platform, and the platform is used by 1 in 4 new Australian employees. Previously, James was the co-founder of Brigade, which was a social network for voters whose mission it was to build technology that modernises democracy. And before Brigade, he was president of Facebook Causes, the world's largest platform for activism with over 200 million users. As an investor and mentor, James has worked with dozens of technology companies locally and in the US, including through leading accelerators Tankstream Ventures and StartMate. James holds degrees in history and law from the University of Sydney and a master's degree in international trade from Georgetown University. He previously practiced law at Allens Arthur Robinson and at the World Trade Organization in Geneva. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much. It's a long introduction. Too long, probably.
We're doing them all this length so that everybody gets to know the background of all our speakers. So don't you're not unusual.
Fantastic. Well, let's get underway. I think James has some slides that he was going to show. Have we got those ready, gents? Fantastic. Here we go. Well, James, tell us about Flare, and tell us about the research that was featured in the AFR yesterday.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you everybody for having me today. Very excited to be here. Flare's a company that is now coming into its 8th year of existence. Our vision is to help every business make pay and benefits fair for every worker, and it's something that was always core to our existence from the very beginning back in 2015, but probably hasn't been something we've been capable of leaning into until the last couple of years. And the reason for that change has been a material change in the market. And that's been brought on by COVID. And specifically what's changed is employees' expectations when it comes to exactly what their businesses provide for them. Our business is big. We've got over 1 million users. Currently, our software onboards 1 in 4 Australians who start a new job. And our suite of benefits is designed really to democratize that solution for all businesses, big or small. So we have a range of financial products that we offer to employees. We have a range of benefits, perks, various other things specifically to help businesses engage their employee base. The research we did with EY was anchored around that hypothesis, which is coming out of COVID, a time when so many employees were totally dislocated from the status quo of their lives, where what they thought was their job, what they thought was their day-to-day was fundamentally changed. We wanted to ask the question, how has that led to a changing of expectations, not from a business to their employees, which happened at the very beginning of 2020, but rather from the employees to their business? And in many ways, the results are not particularly surprising. If you stop and think for a moment, a world in which most people were asked to fundamentally change the way they interacted professionally, it was unlikely that people would, when asked to return to work, simply re-engage on exactly the same terms. So we interviewed 7,000 workers across a range of occupations, a range of working types, a range of industries, specifically to understand exactly how their expectations had changed. And I'll run through these slides pretty quickly. But I think if there is one point I'd encourage you to take away, it's the first point, which specifically is the following, that 55% of Australians have changed their expectations in terms of what they look for in a job after COVID. To say that differently, if you work in a business right now, 1 in 2 people used to expect certain things in 2019 that they no longer expect, and they used to not expect things that they now expect. That's a massive shift. That's a massive shift for businesses. That's a massive shift for employees, for colleagues, for how we think about the world. Now, what we were interested in understanding in this research was exactly what role compensation played in that. Now, compensation isn't pay. Well, it is pay, but it's not exclusively pay. Compensation is about how people get paid, how they think about their salaries, how they think about benefits associated in the workplace. And we really wanted to unpack the relationship between pay on the one hand, benefits on the other, and finally, the role that financial wellness played in all of that. And what we uncovered was interesting. We uncovered a pretty slippery slope where ultimately you could start as a business with an engaged base of employees and very quickly turn around, and a material chink in your armor was one where employees simply didn't have the benefits they now wanted. So what our research showed, and you can see it on this first slide, is that only 1 out of 3 employees had benefits offered from their work. And for them, that was insufficient because 3 out of 4 employees wanted those benefits. If you jump to the next slide, the other thing that we wanted to understand was pay, and specifically pay timing. Pay timing isn't a term that many folks, I'm guessing, listening right now have come across. The reality is pay timing is something we take for granted. We always have just assumed that you get paid when your employer decides to pay you. But at a time when so much of the rest of the economy has become on demand, what does pay on demand look like? And that needs to be differentiated from payday lending, which I don't want to get into. This is specifically a world where we come back to work and we say, why am I accepting a reality where I'm only getting paid money I'm owed by my employers on their terms? And essentially what we've identified is that Australian workers are in fact, and troublingly, the biggest creditor in the economy to their employer. So 51% of people paid weekly, fine. What does that mean? It means the vast majority of everyone else is not paid weekly. They're paid fortnightly, monthly, or regularly. More troublingly, what we're identifying is that 25% of people have said they've been paid late, and the same amount of people have said they've been underpaid. So people are paid not on their terms, they're paid late, or they're underpaid. Okay, well, what does that mean? If you jump to the next slide, what it means is that we've got a material cash flow issue for most Australians at the moment. 2 out of 3 people who suffer that issue are turning to credit cards. And I understand a very strong buy now, pay later narrative that young Australians don't have credit cards. The data doesn't really support that at the moment, the data that we're seeing. 1 in 5 Australians using a personal loan or a mortgage to make a vital purchase, and 70% are living paycheck to paycheck and having less than $5,000 in savings. A different point that supports that thesis of paycheck to paycheck is almost 2/3 of people will wait until payday to make a purchase. If you jump to the next slide, okay, we've got a cash flow issue. Well, here's a real problem. the vast majority of people are unwilling and embarrassed to ask their employers for a pay advance. Yet what they're telling us is that if they had the option to get paid on their schedule, the majority of them would take it up. And more importantly, in taking it up, they believe that that would reduce the amount of financial stress that they have. And you can see at the bottom of the page here a list of the sorts of benefits that individuals are able and interested in taking up. So look, the summary of it all is that, the analogy I can draw for the older folks in the crowd is this is a little bit like the Matrix. At the beginning of 2020, everyone took the blue pill. They rethought what the world was. And now 2 years on, we're kind of asking them to re-engage on the same terms. And they're pretty much saying no. They're saying that we're not willing to do that. And one of the material issues we're facing is our own financial lack of wellness. And we need support to solve that problem in terms of the pay and benefits that you're offering as an employer.
Thanks very much, James. Those are really interesting insights. And I think they really highlight what is being termed the Great Resignation, this idea of people increasingly saying that they're not happy with their package, or they're not happy with their experience as an employee, and businesses are now losing skills at a rapid rate. Michael, I might come to you because Michael at Stone & Chalk is obviously at the fulcrum of the startup ecosystem, and startups turning into scale-ups and startups turning into businesses with more resources to compete for skills. But what are you seeing in terms of the talent market at the moment in the startup sector, and how are startups struggling or managing to compete?
Yeah, it's the same everywhere. Everyone's looking for talent all the time, and that's actually not new. It's a little different now because talent is starting to push back a little bit more. And we started to see this with the gig economy starting, and now with COVID, and the fact that people are feeling like they can have a lifestyle and work, as opposed to sacrificing their lifestyle to have work. The game has changed quite a bit. More importantly, though, I think employers are starting to realize that they no longer control the chessboard. And much like we saw with the democratization of the internet changing how big technology flowed down to consumers, that all reversed. The internet, consumers started to demand and vote with their wallets. We're seeing the same thing now with talent. What we're seeing is that if you don't have an environment where people feel like they can grow, where they can do their best work, and where they're in a position to succeed, they'll go find somewhere else to do that. So the same is true whether you're a startup or a scale-up, or whether you're a large corporation. How you work is sort of a personal thing, sort of like how you learn. And what we're finding now is that organizations that consider the employee experience as part of their strategy are the ones who are starting to see more success. If you don't have an employee experience strategy, you're leaving it to chance. And what we're seeing, and what we're talking to our village of startups and scale-ups about on almost a daily basis, is that you need to plan your employee strategy and that experience the same way you would plan your customer strategy and your customer's experience, and your business strategy and the experience you want people to have with you. So if you create that employee experience strategy, and you design an environment that's designed around the experience that your employees want to have, you're going to have A, far more productive employees, and B, far more engaged employees. And so you'll see lower turnover, and the war for talent starts to become less of an issue because your retention goes up, other turnover happens elsewhere, and you become a place where people want to work. And so suddenly everyone else has got a war for talent, and you're just chugging along. But if you leave it to chance, somebody else is going to win the war instead of you.
Yeah, that issue of an employee value proposition is something that I think companies of all sizes now have an imperative to think about in the skills market. Gaurav, I might come to you for the global perspective, because of course your consultancy work would see this across the world. Are you finding that the skills shortages extend beyond Australia, and how is this impacting demand for services that you offer?
Absolutely. So we operate not just in Australia, but India, US, and Canada as well. And the situation is same everywhere. I think you used the term the Great Resignation. The way we are looking at it is it's the Great Reskilling revolution. There is a tremendous challenge, but at the same time, there is a massive opportunity here as well. And at MTX, we believe that education and building economic opportunity through rewarding employment is a key focus area. So we invested in this global learning office that I lead, and it is not just for India, but again covers Australia as well, where we are trying to bring in new people into the business, help them develop new skills, put them on new learning pathways. And then this leads to opportunities which did not exist in the conventional or the traditional market. So I come from a technology background. I used to be a CTO in my past life. And the only reason I took on this new role as a chief learning officer is I'm passionate about learning. I'm passionate about reskilling. And that's where I think the opportunity for the future is as well.
That is really interesting. I might come back to you, Liz. And for those who aren't aware, before joining the Skills Commission, Liz was the founder of a startup in her own right, and so has experienced all of these issues herself. It is really challenging for a company where they both want people to grow and pivot and reskill, but also don't want to lose staff. How are you seeing this play out in the marketplace?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely right. Like what Siobhan was talking about, and Gaurav just beforehand. It's really about how you, as employers, address this. I mean, just one point on the Great Resignation I wanted to make is we're not seeing it in Australia yet. What we are seeing is the Great Relocation. So you've got a lot of people moving out into other areas. But the flip side of low unemployment, 4.2%, is the fact that you've got people with a lot of opportunities now. And I think it's really about, as Michael was saying, you as an employee or a new entrant into work have got a lot more bargaining power, and unless the value proposition is really attractive, you're not going to get the best people as an employer. So I think that's a huge change that we're starting to see. I mean, we could well still have the Great Resignation going down the track, but the evidence, the data that we're looking at is not showing it yet. It's still, I think the latest survey was talking about over the next 12 months, 92% of people do intend to stay with their current employers. So we're not seeing the sort of data that you're seeing from around the world. Definitely, it's very much about you're now, like the tables have turned. As a new employee or someone who's a good employee already with an employer, it's about what's the employer presenting to you that makes you want to stay there. As opposed to someone else who's, enticing you with other options.
Mm-hmm. James, what does the EY data tell us? Because I think we do see the harbingers there, don't we? Particularly when you look at data around the reasons why people are leaving their jobs.
Was that a question for me, Harry?
Yes.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like financial issues are material. I think that's what we're seeing. I think, look, I do believe there's a lot of people will have their very specific own experiences with their employer. They will rationalize after the fact the dislocation they feel and the decision to leave. And I do believe that probably bubbles up into looking for an answer around something more tangible and organized, like finances or pay that they can point to. So that's sort of acknowledging the reality that I do think we're looking to quantify or organize findings around something that is hyper-personal and very fragmented. But the data does tell us that reassessing their financial position is material. That's what the data tells us. The data tells us that the number of people who've taken out debt over the last 2 years is material. The number of people who currently can't earn sufficient take-home pay to support that debt is material. And then in addition to that, expectations generally around what an employer provides, quantitative, qualitative, quantitative being the pay, the benefits, the specifics, qualitative being the experience, something we talk about a lot at Flair, the employee experience. This seems to be the bundle of stuff that goes into explaining why those people who want to leave are indeed leaving, or in fact, those people who have left are explaining why they left. So, it's interesting. We do see so many of the employees in Australia who start jobs. 1 in 4 is material enough for us to feel pretty good about the signals we're getting being largely reflective of the economy and how it's operating at the moment. What we're seeing is the averages seem to be the same, but the medians have changed. It's kind of that old story of the average Australian family has 2.3 children, but no one has 2.3 children. What we're seeing is material shifts up in terms of particular industries that are hiring a lot more than they did, say, 2 years ago, and material shifts down in terms of industries that were hiring that are no longer hiring. So I think from the outside looking in, the data looks pretty flat, but if you split it up by industry, business size, location, you start to actually see some divergence. Which is interesting. It may be a leading indicator for, I think a point that was just made, a really smart point, that we haven't seen it yet, but maybe we will see the Great Resignation.
Yeah. Siobhan, you're probably at the coalface of this because you're seeing an influx of demand for people wanting to transform the mix of skills within their businesses. But I think the conversation about pivoting is often a really challenging one for a lot of people, particularly people who've worked in a particular industry or a particular role for some time. How do you go about communicating what reskilling means for an individual and doing so in a constructive and positive way?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think there's different scenarios when reskilling is a thing, right? There's the good scenario when someone wants to advance their career and they want to, move faster and progress a lot quicker within a job structure. And then there's the unfortunate other side of that. The shadow of that is then folks that are being forced, right? You got to remember that there's a lot of folks that are really proud to do the job that they trained to do their whole life. And then someone's coming along and taking it off them. And everyone just thinks that, they're going to be fine. Just throw them some reskilling and everything will be fine. And we'll send them a couple of emails and then give them an outplacement program and it'll be fine, right? So there's the way that we look at the world is they're very individual scenarios, and how you treat the whole person, their family, the bigger picture on the shadow side of this is a very different approach to the individual wanting to aggressively move up in their career.
Yes, yeah.
If we focus...
Carry on, sorry.
From my perspective, we like to split it into sort of not kind of blur it all into the same thing, because the approach is very different and has to be designed to make sure that you're actually getting the output for the individual, right? Because if you think about the hearts and minds of every single person, how do you design that journey and give them information, whether it is that individual who's been impacted because of, not a great reason, or you've got the, more early career professionals now are expecting that they want to get skills and move really quickly. So they want to do a fast track 18 months and then they're expecting to move on. So now what organizations that are really clever are starting to think about is, well, how do we create this gig economy internally inside of our organization to create this marketplace concept, which means they don't have to leave us to do that, that we can give them an opportunity to put their hand up and say, hey, I want to progress myself into more in marketing. I'd really love to learn about the SEO, or I'd really like to pick up these skills in this other part of the business. So I think if you're an organization that's thinking about keeping people, one of the things that you should consider is how to create this internal marketplace concept to allow folks who are wanting to progress to actually access the marketplace. But then also that same marketplace can be used from an agility point of view. So if you are having to make massive structural changes in your business, or you are, one of the big banks and you are going to have to shut down branches because that's pretty inevitable, how can you prime those individuals to send them on that journey using that marketplace? So I know that's a really long answer to the question, but it's like, it hasn't been solved for years. And I think they have to be treated quite differently, right? And always with the human at the center. I think that's the problem that organizations do, is they just buy in a load of learning. And I get really frustrated by it, because I'm like, what, you're expecting them to just learn and give up the career that they've loved doing their whole life? Really?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that actually brings us quite neatly to a question on the Slido. And for those in the room or those playing at home, you can go to slido.com, enter Future Work Summit as the code, and submit your questions for us to ask the panel. But we have a question we're asking Gaurav about the kinds of people, the demographics of people that you find coming to you for reskilling and redeployment. Who are the types of people who you tend to see?
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all. I mean, over the last few years, we have seen all kinds of people who want to get into the technology industry, and again, we have seen like diverse backgrounds. We have a program called a Career Shift training program, where we basically pick people from diverse backgrounds and we put them through a training program. At the end of the program, we evaluate like how good they are, how in terms of the concepts that they picked up, what are the skills that they developed. And again, it's very varied. So we have had across India, across US, across Australia, we've had people from very diverse backgrounds. There have been carpenters, there have been truck drivers, there have been people who were from a digital marketing background, wanting to become programmers and consultants. So it's been very, very varied. And again, the one common thread across all of them was that people who have been successful in those programs were people who really wanted to do things and who really wanted to upskill. And again, our conscious strategy has been that there was a time where degrees mattered, but now we are living in the day and age where skills matter more than anything else. So we have been consciously focusing on the skilling aspect and people who want to learn and giving them opportunity, and that's worked out wonderfully well.
You must be seeing similar ranges in people who come to Stone and Chalk Group for your new initiatives around reskilling. Tell us a bit about what you're doing and who you're seeing.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting misconceptions about startups and scale-ups is that it's all millennials. It's not. There are a lot of people that have become serial entrepreneurs and failed more times than they care to remember or count until they finally found something that they could succeed in. So it usually means they look more like me than they do like my children. And we are seeing people come from lots of different places. I love the comment that we're not looking at degrees, or we're not looking at specific titles. We're looking at skills. It's a meritocracy out there now. Everyone's fighting for some success. And we see that in Stone and Chalk all the time. It's first of all, you have to have a thick skin to be a founder, and you have to have a thick skin to work in a startup, but I think it's fair to say you have to have a thick skin to work full stop these days. And so what we're seeing is the types of people who are successful and are changing careers are doing it for all the reasons you heard everyone else on the panel say. There really is no secret sauce. There's no one skill or one type of person that's pivoting to a new career. They are pivoting because either, as a friend of mine who called me out of the blue a couple of weeks ago said, really sick of being in telco, right? So he decided I'm just gonna go and learn something new, and he's at a point in his career when he can, and not that he's, he can't work, he doesn't have to work anymore, but he wants to try something completely new before he can't, and he's too old and too much like the furniture, as they say at certain telcos. But there are lots of reasons people shift, and I think, as Siobhan said, sometimes they shift because they want to try something new, like my friend, and sometimes their roles are no longer relevant, or sometimes they've been automated out of the business, or sometimes a role has been automated into the business, and somebody needs to fill those roles. And we're seeing that in the startup world, we're seeing that in scale-ups, and we're also seeing that in the ecosystem that surrounds them, because there's a lot of businesses that are growing up and becoming part of that cluster of ecosystems that are serving the startup and the scale-up industries, and we're seeing a lot of that happen here.
That's actually something I really want to put to James. As a former international trade lawyer who decided to become a serial entrepreneur, what are the sorts of things that go through your mind when you're thinking about the skill sets that you have and transitioning them into an entirely new industry and taking a huge risk at founding a business?
Necessity. I couldn't get a job. I'm not joking. Like I think some entrepreneurs, like my co-founder, co-CEO Daniel, I think is a born entrepreneur, which is a really polite way of saying this guy can never work for anyone else. But for me, who my mum's a primary school teacher, my dad's an accountant. Like I didn't grow up. I didn't grow up where business was something that starting a business was something that was even within my purview. That was simply not anything that crossed my particular perspective as a young man trying to work out what the hell I should do in the world. So in all honesty, 2008 financial crisis, I'm in America, finished my degree. I work in Geneva as a trade lawyer. I think of myself as the accidental entrepreneur in that I simply couldn't get a job anywhere else. And then was lucky enough to meet one of the sort of great technical entrepreneurs of the early 2000s, Sean Parker, who gave me a job at what was then a company called Facebook Causes. So like for me, it was necessity that led me down the path. To answer your question less flippantly, look, I think the beautiful thing about professional training is organized thinking. And in a world of chaos, you can't control chaos, but organized thinking can help you make good decisions. And I think that what we like to look at Flair, when it comes to people who succeed or don't succeed, because a lot of people don't succeed. That's one of the bigger challenges at the moment. I had this conversation just yesterday. Actually, hiring people into startups right now is harder than ever. And the reason for that is not a lack of demand. More people than ever before want to be in startups. There's a certain reality that not everyone should be in a startup. And it's horses for courses in the same way that I'm not going to do great in a big corporation. A lot of people who come into a startup, a high growth startup that's growing 200, 300, 400% year on year, and complain that there's too much change, there's too much on their plate. It's like, what did you expect? You know, what did you think was going to happen when you're trying to put yourself in a rocket ship and get to, escape velocity? So I think in that world, resilience is so important, and resilience can come from the ability to use organized thinking, to go back to something I said a moment ago, to solve complex problems. I think that was probably the biggest translatable set of skills that I had. I actually think so many of the other skills that you learn in larger corporations, to speak quite frankly, you actually just have to unlearn. Like you like what you thought was the right way to do something, what you thought was the right way to take a piece of content to a steering committee and get sign off across the board. There's that poem, Ozymandias, which is about a statue in a desert. There's a certain reality that if you try and build those sorts of structures in a startup, then like Ozymandias, you'll probably be sitting there with a couple of stumps as the hot air blows by you. So I think it's resilience, organized thinking, and the ability to probably unlearn a lot of the things that you probably had coming in.
That's a really interesting insight. I mean, are these the sorts of things that you think about with Pivot at Stone and Chalk? Like, what are the kinds of things you can teach?
Yeah, Pivots are a program that does just that. It helps people pivot their career into startups and scale-ups. And we do teach people that, like John said, that not everybody's built for a startup. But we try to get them to understand what skills are transferable from wherever they are, what skills, as you heard, do need to be unlearned, but also what to expect. And I think expectations are probably the biggest reality check for most people trying to pivot their career to something else. No one wants to pivot their career and start at the bottom, but pivoting your career and starting at an equivalent place where you left is also pretty unrealistic. That's a hard conversation to have with people. Pivoting your career and expecting you to have immediate sort of status and respect that you expected at your previous role. It's also another one. The fact that you have to maybe pivot your career and think a little differently about what getting the job done means. That's, you look over your shoulder for that person that you need to tell what to do, and it turns out it's a mirror. That's a tough call, where people realize that they actually have to do things. I can remember some of the conversations I've had over my career with people in a startup. In fact, I can remember hiring a marketing person at a startup, and the first day on the job, she turned to me and said, who do I brief to draft the marketing plan? And I thought, okay, well, this isn't going to last. And I had to explain to her that she has to create the marketing plan, not just the brief, so that somebody can create a marketing plan. And she said, well, who's going to talk to the agency? And I said, okay, well, we really have to have a discussion about finances in a startup. There is no agency. That's why I hired you. And needless to say, I don't think she made it through that week. But it's fair to say that people don't know what to expect. And the worst disservice you can do to somebody who's pivoting their career is not to tell them what to expect. The real honest truth for some people is you may not be cut out for any job in that organization, and telling them differently perhaps is not a service to them.
Indeed, they'll just be looking at their work mightily and despairing, as James would say. So, Liz, this is something that actually I know you're really passionate about, and that someone has asked about on the Slido. For older people who are deciding to pivot late in their career, how do they know what they need, and who's building the employee pathways for them? This is a really challenging issue, and it's one that I know you've done some work on in the past.
Look, shameless self-promotion, go to the National Skills Commission website and have a look at our beta tool, which will soon be out of beta, and once we get the new data on it. But seriously, it's a really important thing that's happening now. I think I was watching Insiders on the weekend, and someone was quoting Lenin saying there's decades where nothing happens, and then you have decades happening in a matter of weeks. And if you can apply this to the area of skills and jobs, this is really a period where there's just so much change that's happening. And I think the biggest challenge for a lot of people is to, I guess, get comfortable with uncertainty. That's sort of almost against human nature, because we like things to be the same, and that's sort of how we all operate comfortably. But I think that sort of has to be turned on its head, and for people to understand that things are changing all the time. You've got to keep on upskilling. Point that was made before, which I totally agree with, Michael, that it's not so much about qualifications anymore. In fact, all the tech companies, are coming out and saying it doesn't matter whether you've got a degree. It's more about who you are and whether you've got the capability, the right attributes, the cultural fit, and all of that sort of stuff. All of that is 100% right, and certainly that's what I'm finding. When I'm hiring people, is we're looking for that mix of someone who's obviously smart and has potential, but doesn't necessarily have to have the full skill set. As long as we feel as a team that they can bring that skill set to us, or acquire that skill set as they're working with us. So it's a different way of looking at the world completely to what it used to be.
That's a really interesting insight, and definitely goes back to what Gaurav was saying about university not necessarily being a prerequisite. Gaurav, do you find that there are certain attributes that do contribute to how well a person coming in as a consultant to a business would fit in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think soft skills plays obviously a key role, and again, that is something that regardless of whether you are in a technology role or whether you are in certain other role, you expect like people to have certain level of soft skills. And again, if their skills are not up to the mark, that is something which you can fine tune as part of the training or the internships that you provide. But I think just having a good soft skills and an aptitude and the ability to learn and the willingness to learn, I think that's the most important. So a lot of people just don't realize that there are opportunities that they can pursue, because it's a mental block that they have, that I've been all my life in this specific career, and this is something which I've been doing. How do I learn, and how do I get out of this is something that they never think about. So I think if you show them that these are the opportunities, these are the challenges that you'll face in this journey, I think a lot of people would be up for the battle.
Yeah, Siobhan, do you think this is sort of helping us move towards a more equal access workforce in a way, where it doesn't really matter how old you are or where you went to school, there are opportunities for you because your soft skills might be stronger?
In theory, yes. But what you got to do is you got to first untrain the manager who makes the decision, right? So, for every time you make a good recommendation, if we can give them a little nudge on the head to just make a good decision, because if you find you can only put up these recommendations, but if someone is consistently making the same decision, and it's not because they're by nature biased, it's just their pattern matching of this is a success I've had before. So you've got to convince them that something else is going to be, a success in their team. I think this is where data plays such a beautiful role in creating this new world, right? If you can showcase examples where folks within your business have been successful, have had non-traditional pathways. And this is where one of the first things we do in ReGeek is we have a look at every single organization. You can see in my background, right? Every organization is made up of hundreds of little pathways. And what we do is we look at all those pathways and we zone into the individual and to the team and to the business. And if you can show folks here are all the people that have been non-traditional, and you know what? A lot of the time they're the highest performers. That's the evidence-based decision making. So you're really helping them make a good and fair decision. So I think probably change management a little bit around, changing how we do. You do have open minds right now because folks are struggling to get people. So they are kind of, the great reinvention moment right now is happening where we can have, as HR, practitioners, we can have a lot more impact right now. And sort of we're just kind of calling on folks to not waste that moment, to use data to help them make those decisions.
That's a really interesting point, and I think the theme of democratization is one that has certainly pervaded the panel discussion in totality. James, you were talking about it at the beginning in the context of democratizing benefits. But one of the big problems that a lot of businesses that are smaller and don't necessarily have the experience or resources of an ASX 50 company is that they really struggle to compete and to offer what will attract the skills that they need effectively. What are some ways that you've been exploring about how to help reach those businesses?
Again, was that a question for me, Harry?
Yeah,
Sorry.
it certainly was.
Thank you. Look, I come back to, as someone who's been in and struggled through small businesses, there's a certain reality that you have 1,000 things to do. And it's not that you don't care about your employees, and it's not that you don't want them to thrive. It's simply that, when you're living in the state of nature, you're not particularly interested in style points. And so fundamentally, I think the answer has to be accessibility, ease of use, the ability to turn things on, have things out of the box, simply be able to put things into play technologically that don't require extended periods of implementation, that don't require a lot of upskilling, that don't require adding an additional person simply to manage the solution. That's kind of the other side of democratization. Actually, my last startup, which was anchored around civic engagement, democratization is a two-sided coin, right? On the one hand, it's about trying to get as many people as possible to engage. But in an ideal world, you want those people to engage in an informed way, and becoming informed takes effort. And so when I think about democratizing this solution, arming small businesses with tools that allow them to compete with ASX 50 companies, I think you have to be empathetic to the reality that, this weapon you're giving them can't have a long instruction manual. I think people need to be able to, I shouldn't say point and shoot, but they need to be able to point and shoot, because at the end of the day, there's so many other things that they need to be focused on. So I think as a technology provider who's stepping into this space, so much of what we're looking at is not just the solution, because I just think the solution by itself is but one piece of the puzzle. What we're looking at is how we can partner, leveraging existing workflows, existing pieces of technology to make the ability to consume democracy, the ability to consume the solution that's going to be very helpful. How can we make that turnkey and integrated and plug into stuff that you're already doing? So I think that's the key point for me.
Yes, yeah. And Michael, it's something that I think a lot of businesses at the startup end would be looking to Stone and Chalk, or community, a village as you call it, to help them out with. What are startups looking for right now beyond a desk?
They're not looking for a desk, actually. They're looking for support. Our job isn't to provide a desk. In fact, as I visited all of our hubs, we have one in Sydney, one in Adelaide, and here, and one in Melbourne. And honestly, nobody actually said, I love my desk, or I missed my desk, or my chair. I was really surprised. What they said is, I love the people that I get to meet. I love the other founders I get to work with. I learn from the mentors and the programs and the services we provide. And this is about providing a career pathway for entrepreneurs that doesn't exist. You know what to do if you want to be a tradie. You know what to do if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or in marketing. You can follow a career path that starts at school and takes you all the way through. You can't do that if you're an entrepreneur. You walk out of school and suddenly you're totally on your own, and there's no guidance whatsoever. And that's what Stone and Chalk's here to fix. We want to transform the Australian economy into a technology-driven economy, and one that's sustainably so. But to do that, we have to give entrepreneurs a pathway with guardrails. So give them an understanding from school to post-schooling, into the startup communities, into scale-ups, and hopefully past the scale-up point where they're now corporates or hopefully even enterprises, And they need guardrails and support throughout that process. It doesn't exist anywhere else in Australia right now. In fact, pretty much nowhere else in the world. If you don't go to school and say, oh, I want to grow up and be an entrepreneur. Why not? You certainly should be able to. And we're missing out on a tremendous amount of innovation. We're missing out on a tremendous amount of productivity, investment in Australia, investment from Australia into our people, and success that we could be having on a world stage, so that our successful entrepreneurs don't have to go overseas to be successful. So we're creating that pathway all the way through so that entrepreneurs can stay in Australia, be successful on the world stage, and attract investment and the brightest minds in the whole world to come work here and stay in Australia.
That is fascinating, and I think this conversation has taken us from the war for talents to how to found a startup to reciting Percy Shelley. So it's been a terrific conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and please thank our panel.
Thank you.